Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Heather Lomas and I'm here today to provide an introduction to the Museum Development Network Museums Organisational Health Check. And what I'm going to do today is talk you through the completion of the Organisational Health Check. And just to make sure we all know what we're doing, this session is particularly aimed at museums who are completing this health check as part of their organisational review. So, purpose of the session then, the aims of this session are to introduce you to the museum's organisational health check, to provide some understanding for you on how completing it will feed into your museum's forward planning and your business planning, to provide an opportunity to discuss and consider the six sections of the health check, and to enable you to self-assess and score the museum, providing an indicator of your museum's overall organisational health. So that's the purpose of this session. The museum's organisational health check is a self-assessment tool, so it enables you to provide an indicator to help you highlight your museum's current practice, to understand where the museum has some areas of development, and to feed into your forward planning. So we think the results of this will really help you to do all of those things. We imagine that completing it will also enable you to prioritise your areas of working over the next 12 months and provide you with a benchmark for future work. So we imagine that this whole process of going through the health check should take approximately 45 minutes for you to complete. So just carrying on from that, thinking about how it might work for you, as I've said previously, it provides you with an indicator of your museum's overall organisational health. I think with anything that's a self-assessment, you have to somehow manage to try and get some consensus of opinion of a few people to make sure that you're in the right ballpark for understanding it as an indicator. But it also enables museums to understand what they're doing well, their areas of challenge. We know it feeds into your forward and business planning, but it's also useful to know that museums across the whole of England, in all regions, are completing it, and the results are feeding into regional and national museum development and museum development network information. So we're asking you to score yourselves with this self-assessment exercise, and it's based around the forward and business plan, so there's a question about that, and then there's 6 key themes which enable you to think about areas that are very important to the development of the museum. In recognition of where we are at the moment in 2020, there is also a COVID-19 related question to answer for each section. So, getting started. With the organisational health check, you will need at least 2 people from your organisation, and ideally it's really helpful to have people who do different roles. So you might look to have somebody who is from your senior leadership or your trustees to help with that, but equally somebody who might be doing front of house work, volunteers, collections, learning. A nice group of people to contribute is really helpful, but at least 2 people. You'll also need a copy of the museum's organisational health check, and this is available from your museum development provider, and you could have this on the screen while you're talking about it, or you might find it easier to print a copy off. Within that, there is guidance telling you how to go about it, but there's also what we call the scoring page. So you would need a copy of the scores to remind you about that. You'll also need the areas of improvement or areas of development that were identified in your most recent letter from Arts Council England, which confirmed your accreditation status. So looking that out would be a really useful reminder for you, I imagine, as well as helpful with this scheme. What we will need from you is 1 completed organisational health check from each museum. So only 1. And we'd like people to complete this using the online link. And the online link will be provided by your museum development provider, who will be able to provide you with a bit more information and the link to complete the survey. So it's an online process. You ideally talk about the results and then you input the information. Once you've completed it, you will receive a bespoke advisory report with a summary of your results and some suggestions of where to access support in your highlighted area of need. So museum development will receive the results back, and your local regional team will create this advisory report to support you. I think the important thing to remember is that this is self-assessment. There are no rights or wrongs. We're not judging you on whatever scores you put down as your self-assessment, but I think it's about thinking how that's going to help you in the future and what support will be available. So the health check themes, we have a question that's asked generally about the forward plan. So if you're looking now at the actual health check, you'll be able to see that there is the forward plan question. And then following that, we have 6 themes, which are listed here. And within each theme, there are a short series of questions for you to consider and score. So there are some questions in each theme, and we're asking you to score each question. Also important when you're doing the scoring and under each theme is discussing it with colleagues, but also thinking carefully about the evidence you have available and examples of how the museum works within that theme. So I'll talk through some examples when we're actually talking about each of the 6 themes, but having some evidence there and actually discussing what that means for your museum will enable you to reach consensus, and it will support your scores for each section. So you're not just randomly picking a score because you think it's a good score for the museum. You're actually looking at the evidence that exists that can support that. Okay, so these are the scores then, and you'll be able to see that if you're looking at the guidance and the health check itself. And they start with at 0, which would be saying we don't do this at all. So this particular area in the health check, we're not doing this at all at the moment. And they range up to 4, which says we're excellent at this. And we think if you're saying you're an example of a 4, then that would be something which would be something that you're really good at, you're excellent at, but also would be an example of good practice that you'd be able to share with other museums. So I think scoring yourselves within that range is hopefully will be okay for you, but having those discussions with your colleagues about where you fit for each score will be very important. So, shall we get started? After each of the 6 sections, I will leave a pause because it might be useful for you at that point to then discuss that theme within your little team that you've got there, thinking and completing the organisational health check. So there will be an opportunity for you to take a break from the film, look at the questions, consider the scoring, and the evidence you might have for it, and then come back to the film when you've done that. So I will, I'll talk us through that as we go along. Okay. The first section, as I say, is the forward and business plan. And this section enables you to think about your business planning. So what it actually says is, obviously, forward business plan is fundamental in helping your museum to plan ahead. It's a tool that helps everyone understand the museum's priorities, the opportunity and challenges, and it should be used to monitor progress and developments. So when you look at the question on the health check associated with this, it's helpful for you to think about some of the following things. So thinking about how often your museum undertakes business and forward planning. So is that something that you do on a regular basis? And if so, how does that work? Who do you actually involve in the process? So is it that you get a variety of ideas and inputs into when you're developing the forward plan, and to help with creating your aims and objectives. And then how do you use it as a monitoring tool? So how do the board use it? How do the senior leadership team use it? How do the volunteers use it as a way of judging what the museum is actually achieving and using it as a monitoring tool and something to build on for the future? So that's the first question, is about forward business planning. And before we move on to the 6 key themes, you might want to think about what does the museum do well with forward and business planning? Where are the challenges? There is a space on the health check for you to talk about how the COVID-19 crisis has impacted on the museum's forward plan, and what evidence or best practice do you think is available to support this score? If you'd like to take a break now while you think about those issues, that would be great, and then you can rejoin us for the start of the 6 themes. So, welcome back. Moving now on to the first of our 6 themes, and that is governance and leadership. Good governance is at the heart of a thriving museum. For an independent museum, governance is typically delivered through a board of trustees, and in a local authority museum, this can be through varying levels of leadership. First things again to think about are, what do you think the museum does particularly well within museum governance? And what things would you like to improve or develop? So there are some things there, thinking about governance, what works well, what could be improved. How has the COVID-19 crisis impacted on the museum's governance and leadership? And again, what evidence and best practice is available to support the score that you're considering giving? So if you're thinking of giving a score, what is it? It'll be between 0 and 4, but which one is it? And just some of the things I think are important for you to consider when you're thinking about governance and leadership. What evidence have you got that you're doing good governance? What's the role of the governing body in helping to set strategic direction, in setting the vision and the purpose, in leading the organisation and supporting and challenging the workforce? How do you, within your governance, manage risk? How does that work? And how is governance and the board and the trustees involved in forward and business planning, and how that works as well? So, use this time to discuss governance and leadership, and think about the scores and the notes that you need to make in that section. You may wish to pause the film here whilst you think about this section, and before we move on to the next theme of financial planning and resources. Moving on now to financial planning and resources. This is number 2 of our 6 themes. Sustainable and resilient museums secure, allocate and manage financial resources to deliver their core purposes. And again, you'll notice there's a theme arising here. I'm asking you, what does the museum do well within this particular theme? What would you like to improve or develop? And how does the COVID-19 crisis impact on the museum's financial planning and resources? Things to think about there, but also what evidence or best practice do you have that's available to support the score that you're thinking of giving? So a score between 0, we don't do any of this at all, and 4, we're really excellent at this. Obviously, there are several questions within this section, but the things I think you need to think about are, do you regularly review your finances, and how often do you do that? Is that something that the museum does? How does the museum go about setting budgets and planning its finances? How robust are your financial procedures and protocols? So thinking about that. And do you have the skills in your team? And that could be your staff team, but also at board level, do you have the skills that you need to help you to manage your financial resources appropriately? So that's the financial resources section. There are several questions to complete. You could take some time now to discuss financial planning and resources and complete the scores and the notes and come back to the film when you're ready. Moving on now to number 3 of our key themes is people development and management. So an effective museum workforce has the right set of skills needed to deliver the museum's aims and objectives. So the people that help you to achieve this can be staff or volunteers, but you might well as also work with freelancers and other stakeholders where appropriate. So again, you need to think, what do we do that works really well in this area? What do we do that supports people development and management? And where are there areas that we might be able to improve or develop? That question is in there again about the COVID-19 crisis and how it's impacted on your people development and management. And again, I'm asking you, what evidence or best practice do you have to support the score? So some of the things that you might want to discuss and think about might be, how do you know that you have the right set of skills? Do you conduct skills audits? Is that to do with how you recruit people, both as as staff and volunteers, but also as members of your board? What does succession planning look like for you as an organisation, and how do you go about that, both for staff and volunteers, but also when you're looking at developing the succession of your governance team? How do you communicate and support the workforce? And how does the museum invest in development, training and networking for everybody involved? And what priority do you give that? So those are the question areas that you'll be looking at within the organisational health check, within people development and management. You can take a break here and spend some time discussing people development and management, complete the scores and the associated notes with it. Come back and join us when we're on number 4. Number 4 of our 6 is working practices. And working practices encompass the culture of an organisation. So good working practices encourage communication, innovation, partnership working, and a thriving museum welcomes new ideas and is open to change. So what do you do well within that? Can you think of things that the museum is particularly good at that it does within working practices? And are there areas that are a challenge to you or that you would like to improve or develop? Again, thinking about the COVID-19 crisis, how has that impacted on the way the museum is working or has worked? And what evidence or best practice is available to support the score that you're thinking of giving yourself for each of the different areas within working practices? Some of the things that you need to be thinking about and that are listed on the health check are, how do you work within ethical codes and guidance? So how do you all work within that? Environmental sustainability is within this section as well. So how do you plan for that? And how does the museum contribute to environmental sustainability? What's your approach to encouraging innovation? So within your workforce or within trustees or partners that you work with, and how do you consult with people? With partners, audiences and stakeholders, and how do you use that to improve your customer experience? So again, thinking about what evidence you have or the best practice that you might well be doing that you could share with other people, how does that impact on the scores that you're going to give yourselves? Take some time to think about those issues and discuss them with your colleagues. Complete the scores and notes, and then move on when you're ready to section 5. Section 5 is about audiences. So museum A museum has both a current and a potential audience, and effective museums consult and include audiences in creation and delivery of activities. A museum will be aware of potential, have target audiences and plans for these appropriately. It markets and communicates in a variety of ways. So again, what do you do really well with your audiences? What could you do to improve or develop the work you do? How has the COVID-19 crisis impacted on your audiences? And what evidence or best practice is available to support this score? Some of the things that you need to think about within this section is how you consult with audiences and how you use the data that you gather about them to improve the offer that you provide to them. How accessible do you think the museum is to people in lots of different ways? And when you think about the stories you're telling, how do you ensure that your interpretation targets all of the audiences that you want it to and that people can access this? How do you use your marketing effectively to engage all of these different audiences? Think about these things to do with audiences and discuss them with your colleagues, complete the scores for the various questions within this section and put some notes in the columns there too. Moving on, we are now on the final section. This is section 6 and collections. So this is the last of the themes within the health check. A museum's collection is at the heart of the organisation. It's central to the purpose of the organisation and is what makes museums unique. Good collections management shows a clear understanding of the collection, its needs, and how to use it to engage with audiences. So what do you do that's so really great about your work with collections? What does your museum do really well? How could you improve or develop what you do with collections? And how has the COVID-19 crisis impacted on the museum's working practice with collections? What evidence or best practice have you got that can support your score here? So there's various questions within the collections theme. How are you going to be able to score it and what evidence have you got? So some of the things that you need to think about within this section, how far do you understand the significance of your collections? Do you have ways of understanding that? Have you conducted a collections review, for example? Are there particular areas of the collections that you know very well and know their significance, but that might not apply to all areas? Which standards do you work within when you are doing collections management? So are you using different standards for different areas, and how does that impact on your work? How you use your collections to engage with audiences. So what ways are you using, which different ways are you using to engage with audiences? And finally, what's your understanding of managing your digital assets? So are you using that in different ways, and do you fully understand the potential that you've got there to be able to do that? Think about those things, discuss collections in your group and complete the scores and the notes, and then come back for the final sections of the online health check. Welcome back. We're nearly at the end now of the health check, but just to some final areas at the end. Just to remind ourselves about accreditation, there is a section within the organisational health check about areas of improvement or development. So don't forget to refer back to your most recent accreditation award letter at this point. You will have had one of these from Arts Council England, and please list here the areas of improvement or the areas of development which were identified. So this will help your museum development team to understand where some of the key areas of support might be needed to help you within the accreditation scheme. The next question asks you to define your top 3 priority areas for development. So now you've completed all of the scores and you've talked around these 6 key areas and your forward plan with your team. What we're asking you to do is to say, having done all that, where do you think your top 3 priority areas for development are? So out of the 6 areas, we're asking you to rank them 1, 2, and 3, 1 being the most important, and which 3 you think are the most important for the next 12 months. If you're able to do that, that would be great. Excuse me. And then in the final stages, what we're saying now is please take this information and use the information you've gathered from those discussions, from that, from thinking about the scores. Now use that to complete the online museum's organisational health check. Use the link that's provided by your museum development provider. So that will come from them and it will link you directly into the online form where you can put in your scores and your narrative bits of information as well, some of your notes. Okay, that's the last bit of stuff we're asking you to complete, but just so you know what happens next. The information you've provided will be used to create a short advisory report. So hopefully your museum will find that really useful. It will, you've provided this information, it's self-assessment, but museum development will pull that together into a short report for you, which will enable you to feed that back into your forward and business planning. It will highlight your self-identified priority areas for the next 12 months, but it will also have enabled museum development to signpost you to any relevant support and external resources which may be useful to you. The information gathered across the regions and nationally will be hugely useful to museum development to understand current trends and create targeted support for museums. So this information will be used to gather information about programming and development support, and you will be asked and invited to join any programs that museum development thinks that you have indicated that are a priority for your organisation. So it could be really useful from that point of view. And we know that repeating the museum's organisational health check at regular intervals will enable you to see how your museum has evolved. So it's an indicator, it's self-assessment, but it will enable you to see what you've achieved and how your organisation might be scoring itself in the future. So I think that could be really helpful for you to see your potential areas for future growth. Just a slide here about data protection. Obviously, we want you to feel confident when you're completing the health check. As I said before, the information you put in there will be used by your regional museum development team to produce your advisory report, but it also feeds into the wider museum development network across England. So all of the information will help museum development nationally across England to understand the trends and indicators across all museums. And this will help support development of programmes and advice for the future, but also help in determining investment priorities for museum development. So by completing the health check, you're really helping museum development support the future development of museums and where people think there are areas that need investment. So that's really important, and thank you for doing that. Any data that we publish may be in a variety of forms, but there will be no personal information published and museums will not be individually identified. It will be identifying trends rather than individuals. If for any reason you don't wish for any of this information you've submitted about your museum to be published or shared, then you can let us know at the Museum Development Network through this email, and all information is kept and managed in accordance with the General Data Protection Regulation Act of 2018. Okay, so thank you very much everybody for watching the film, and thank you again for completing the museum's organisational health check. Good luck.